The whitewashing of American history has been an ongoing process for centuries, presumably since the inception of colonialism. Hordes of certified charlatans have fought endlessly to bury the ugly black truth. Even today, several institutions are built upon layers of deceptive historical fuckery. The foundation of this deceptive historical fuckery is the fallacious idea that all so-called black people or Negroes were brought to the Americas from Africa. They want you to think that every Negro that has ever been on the continent was brought as a slave from Africa. And America was virtually uninhabited, unless you count the small bands of Siberian savages who apparently walked across the world through the snow to discover a vast land unoccupied by one single person. Imagine how silly that sounds, yet these foolish facts are taught in schools and taken as true. Our job is to burn the veil that blinds the public and stand confidently on the truth, giving insight to those blinded by the deceptive fuckery. The books were cooked long before the Lambda Calderon put the Mayan manuscripts on the burner. But now we finna write our own book and cook they ass. The unseasoned processed recipes of the calcified con artist only resemble food to those with the taste buds of toddlers. Those of us with a more refined palate require actual food to sustain our hunger. Expecting the food being cooked by these charlatan chefs at these universities and institutions to be of any quality is like expecting Kamala Harris not to say anything stupid.
Unburdened by what has been.
Some things are inevitable. That's why we just cook at home, because we are tired of eating their bullshit.
I do think of bacon as a spice. I do think of bacon as a spice.
I do think of bacon as a spice.
A heaping pile of bullshit lies, not just about history, but about culture, race, and creation. In this episode, we investigate the lies surrounding the Olmec and Maya civilizations, their connection to Egypt, and uncover the true race of the Mayan. Let this fact be initially noted. No accredited academic institution will allow any deviation from their accepted narrative of the status quo. A quote ironically attributed to Napoleon: "History is a set of agreed upon lies." But whose agreement are these lies upon? Who has the authority to say, this is what happened? Who owns the copyright to world history? As we continue to poke holes in their script, we can clearly see their writers are not to be trusted. Well, they can be trusted to do what they do. And what do?
Why you always lying? Oh my God.
They lie.
Full of fresh South Carolina collard greens.
One of the biggest, if not the biggest lies they created is the lie of race. It is not what we have been taught. First, they'll tell you there were no black people or Negroes in America, but when faced with evidence to the contrary, they scramble to create new theories. Then they'll say, regardless of this, the Siberians were here first. But anyone who's been studying this history long enough knows that the oldest art anywhere in the Americas, North, Central, or South America depicting its people or inhabitants were by and large depictions of Negroes, aka black people, purposely miscategorized as Africans. But this isn't just an argument about race, but rather an exhibition of erroneous behavior by the powers that be, and the falsification of race in the academic setting as a key component of that erroneous behavior. And that erroneous behavior is indicative of a larger conspiracy to hide the truth and falsify history. This video will focus on the areas once occupied by the Olmec and Maya, more specifically, Veracruz, Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula, Belize, the Guatemalan highlands and lowlands, and El Salvador, as opposed to the Aztec, Mexica, Toltec occupied territories that we highlighted during the Anubis episode. Most Mesoamerican historians and scholars will tell you that there's no real relationship or connection between the Maya and Aztec. The accepted chronological record leads most to believe the Olmec and Maya were settled long before the Aztec are said to have arrived in the Central Valley of Mexico from their assumed migration from the north. The origins of the Olmec and Maya are more mysterious. Unlike the legends of Aztlan, no one knows exactly where they came from or where they went. Why is it that these so-called historians say there's no connection between the Aztec and Maya? Why are they trying so hard to dispel this connection? They are closer to each other than Miami and Jacksonville, and coexisted during the same time, at least from the beginning of the Aztec, which they say is around the 1300s, until the fall of the Maya in the late 1600s. But let the charlatans tell you, they've never even seen or heard of each other, much less had any real relationship. How plausible is that? But we're not here to point out holes in this more than unlikely assertion necessarily, but rather highlight this no contact, no relationship fallacy as a template for the charlatan mode of operation moving forward. It would seem almost impossible for these two large civilizations to have coexisted separated by just a couple hundred miles and have no knowledge of each other. But hey, that's what the charlatans say. It seems even more impossible considering the vast expanse of the Maya influence. In the Hidden Hand episode, we demonstrated that there were even connections between the Maya and the puddin'-faced niggas of the Midwest, as well as other artifacts found in the southeastern United States that were visibly exhibiting Maya and other Mesoamerican characteristics. Be all this as it may, in this installment, we concentrate on the Maya and to a lesser extent the Olmec to uncover the lies surrounding the narratives of the ancient Yucatan in Central America.
And you deal with it.
They can't stop us. No matter what they do, they can't stop us. Lex. They can't stop us. Lex. Nah. They can't stop us. Yeah. We ain't build no slave ship. We ain't make those anchors. We ain't plot those grave sites up since daylight. Burdened by the things we try to make right. It's gonna be a late night. So much turmoil makes my blood boil. Kundalini, encore. Earth is sunbroad. Dirt is unsoiled. With one chord, tell a story that some spoil. Watch it unfold. Stories untold. Copyright unsold. Books with one spine. Ghosts with one soul. They want control. You want control. But we share one goal. We fight one foe. Satchel front door. And it keeps knocking, but the people kept rocking. Yeah. It keeps knocking, but the people kept rocking, yeah. Can't stop, flex, whatever they do. They can't stop, keeps knocking, but the people kept rocking, yeah. They can't stop us, no, nah, they can't stop us, no, they can't stop us.
When studying the ancient remains from past civilizations, one of, if not the most consequential issues is attempting to establish chronology. Without a clear chain of documented writing or history, trying to nail down a specific period of time a civilization began and ended is nearly impossible. That was until the miracle of the charlatan sciences. The so-called experts have achieved the impossible. Their methods of radiocarbon dating are so accurate they can determine the birth date of a monkey man who lived 50,000 years ago. So a couple of old savage jungle pyramids is child's play. According to their expertise, the Maya just disappeared, vanished without a trace. That story sounds familiar. The charlatan hierarchy of Mayanist academics say that the Mayan Empire began to fall between the years 750 and 900, but also outlasted the Aztec Empire, which fell in the mid-1500s. The Maya are said to have lasted at least until the late 1600s. According to the experts, the construction dates of Mayan complexes were engraved in hieroglyphics within the walls of the complex. The linguists who deciphered the writings gathered through their research that the last complexes to be constructed were around the 900s. So not only do these top experts have the technology to date back millions of years, like with the Grand Canyon, they also possess the linguistic and hieroglyphic proficiency to resurrect a dead script and language with absolute exactness. What can't these people do? Other than tell the truth, of course. Well, they can't date any stone tools, metal objects, or human-made pottery. They can only date organic matter, such as plants, trees, or animal or human skeletal remains. When they do attempt to carbon date pottery or some implement made by a human, they look for any organic matter in the vicinity, date that organic matter instead, then attribute the date of that organic matter to the object. So if you find an ancient chicken bone in a bowl, the bowl might as well be the chicken bone. Seems legit. No need to mention the numerous inaccuracies radiocarbon dating is guilty of producing. You can test that chicken bone 463 times. We just needed to come back 300 BC because I already told the Smithsonian that the bowl, that the bowl was 2,000 years old. Plus that little 300-year buffer off the chain, it'll make it look more legit. You feel me? As claimed by their dating sources, the earliest Mayan settlements sprang up around 1500 BC in a time they call their pre-classic era, which lasted roughly until the year 250 when they supposedly entered their climax during the classic era from 250 to 900. After 900, they call the post-classic era. Those same dating sources say the Olmecs rose up around the year 1200, and yet somehow historians say the Olmec are the mother culture for all other Mesoamerican civilizations, including the Aztec and Maya, although they allegedly had no contact. The Olmec occupied the Mexican state of Veracruz, apparently at the same time as the Maya, lived in the neighboring Yucatan, and just like the Maya, no one knows what happened to them. They weren't even discovered by the charlatans until 1850, which was far too late in the academic game to fabricate an Olmec post-colonial slave narrative. Now, as the charlatans put it, if the Olmec are supposed to be the mother culture of Mesoamerica, shouldn't that mean that they were the first people to occupy that land? And if that's the case, does that mean that they're saying that this part of the world was completely unoccupied until 1500 BC? They paint themselves into a fine corner with all of this totally legit scientific information. Their precision impeccable, their ethics invisible. What would happen if one were to discover a ruin in Olmec or Maya territory that would predate 1500 BC? Then what? Does the entire timeline all of a sudden change? And if it changes, what good was your chronological bullshit to begin with? It's good for dating organic material, apparently. So take corn, for example, in which they claim it can be accurately dated, as maintained by their dating sciences. Corn was first domesticated and harvested on large scale in Mexico 9,000 to 10,000 years ago. But who were the people harvesting the corn? Couldn't have been the Aztec. They weren't even a thing yet. Couldn't have been the Maya or the Olmec. They weren't a thing yet either. So who? Oh, that's right. It was the Siberians. Man, those darn Tartarians. The backbone of any good science argument should always begin with the monkey man cave migration. They brought their Siberian corn seeds across that ice. My bad. They discovered corn and America, then crossbred that corn with other plants to create the corn we know today. Man, pretty impressive for a people who never ate vegetables, nor had any history of agriculture. Considering the genome home of a brand named Native American is the cold, arid tundra of Mongolo Field, it should be no surprise that their diet mostly consisted of fish and other sea creatures, as well as a few sprigs of wild foliage, because the lands from which they ancestrally descend are agriculturally unfit to produce anything. That was till they crossed that ice, boy, and went to a place no one had ever been, an entire continent devoid of any person throughout the history of time. And they got that corn popping, boy. And then after they got that corn popping, boy, they was like, hey, man, let's go bang out some pyramids and shit, dog. But before we do that, let's go make some big-ass statues of some niggers to throw everybody off in 5,000 years. Shit will be hilarious.
This is in northern Guatemala, actually taken from the top of one of the higher pyramids at Tikal, and it's a tropical monsoon forest here. That's the original vegetation of the Maya lowlands. However, we do know from pollen studies that have been made by the palynologists that in fact this forest is a regrowth, that the Maya had most of it cut down, as a matter of fact, towards the end of the classic period due to their agricultural practices. But essentially, before humans came into this is what this area looked like.
Freudian slip. He meant to say, before my European brethren, the white man.
Before humans came into this is what this area looked like. It's a tropical forest civilization that arose there. Now, in that kind of environment, to make a living, of course, these people are maize, corn agriculturalists, maize, beans, squash, chili peppers, and a host of other domesticates, but essentially maize farmers. Within the last 20 years or so, we have come to know from aerial surveys and on-the-ground checking of this, and even through a certain amount of radar survey using side-looking airborne radar, that there is another form of cultivation which was highly intensive in the swampy, low-lying areas, which are very extensive in the Maya region. They cut what are basically ditches and canals, sort of the way the land of Holland was rescued, or the fens of eastern England, through drainage, leaving rectangular plots which are continuously wet, and using the mud from the ditches to basically fertilize these plots. And this is a highly intensive form of agriculture that was practiced in not really over the whole Maya area, but in certain important places. So they could probably support a lot more people than we gave them credit for, let's say 50 years ago, when we thought slash and burn cultivation was the only kind. There were very, very high populations, we know. I won't go into this here now, but there's excellent evidence from archaeological survey that the populations in the Maya area were tremendous. There were millions of people living in that area that by, let's say, 1000 AD probably had only a few thousand.
Here we go! Yeah! Okay, friends, I want to jump to the map here. And what I want us to do is get a good idea of the geography of my territory. So the first thing I want us to do is zoom out and get a big picture of the Americas, right? You got South America, you got North America there. Now, the thing that I want us to pay attention to, all right? Thing I want us to pay attention to now are the continental divides, all right? Particularly, in this case, particularly the Great Western Divide, all right? Now, the Great Western Divide is all the way down at the tip of the Andes down there in South America, going all the way up through the entire continent of South America, through Central America, through Mexico, on up through the Rockies. By God, if it don't end up there at the dang Eastern Siberian Sea, possibly the Bering Strait, depending on the line of delineation. So, of course, on the eastern side of the Andes down there in South America, everything's going to flow into the Atlantic, and everything to the west flows into the Pacific. And that's why you see there in Peru and Chile, you see the land, how it's a little dry down there, all the desert and all that right there. Like right there at the edge of Lima to the south, all right? Now you see that mountain range goes all the way up to Ecuador, Colombia, Panama, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and of course Mexico, all right? The majority of the lands that were occupied by the Maya were on the east of this divide in the lowlands, all right? That's where the lands is low, okay? They primarily inhabited the Yucatan. However, their civilizations or their footprints go all the way down to El Salvador. Now, the southern extent of the Mayan Empire, according to the top Mayanist historians, the southern extent heads down to El Salvador. It doesn't even go into Nicaragua. So they say no Mayan sites have been found thus far into Nicaragua. Now, you can consume that with all the Morton you'd like, all right? Just watch out for the high blood pressure, friends. And I want to draw attention to two sites down there in El Salvador, the most southern extent of the Maya footprint. One of these sites is called Casablanca, the other one's called Carasucia. Now, at this Carasucia site, there was actually an artifact found that looks nothing like an Egyptian artifact. Now, you look at this son of a bitch here. All right? It's not an Anubis. It's not no kind of dog you ever seen. Got nothing to do with nothing, all right? We're going to keep it moving. Now, the Casablanca site is a site that they say is part of the Maya civilization, although they do say it has characteristics of Aztec or Huastec influence, okay? Nothing past that old Coco River down there in Nicaragua, the little border down there between Honduras and Nicaragua. We won't travel north, all right? So, according to the historians, the most northern extent of the Olmec/Maya civilization. So, now, as I was explaining the extent of the southern Maya Empire, that doesn't necessarily correlate with the old Olmecs, you know, the rubber band mans up there in the northern part, okay? So, I'm saying all that to say that the Olmecs, there's right there in that little elbow down there in the Yucatan, okay? Now, the most northern extent of the Olmec/Maya influence was probably El Tayin, all right? That's a nice old pyramid up there, okay? Now, the experts say that El Tayin also has a little bit of that Aztec influence, a little Huasatic, you feel me? So, we it's kind of like a hybrid. The further out you go, the more stuff gets hybrided. It's probably a genetic thing, too. We're going to keep it moving, all right? It's probably a genetic thing. Now, right here in this little Yucatan elbow, this is where the Olmecs was doing their thing, boy. All right? There's quite a few Olmec sites, all right? You got plenty of Olmec sites over here, with more big heads and more big lip bastards. You got him with the hard P, that Tres Zapote, out this son bitch. You feel me? Now, look at that boy face right there. You got that old Siberian face, man. You got them Tartarian lips there, boy. You got that yak fade, boy. Look at that son bitch right there. Looking like a straight Tartarian, Siberian. Looking like he walked across the Bering Strait barefoot, boy. Look at that boy. Yeah, man. Tartarian if I ever seen it. Because, obviously he got that Bering Strait face. That Tartarian taper. That Siberian shape up. I can't think of no more. You got the Inuit perm. You got that Falkland fade. I don't know where the I don't think that's not right. You got that Aryan afro. All right, I guess there's nothing here. Oh, there's something there. I can't find it, and it's making me mad. They say they're ball players, but maybe that ball's ping pong ball. Ping pong player. Yeah. Those ball courts, they were ping pong courts. I bet you up on that helmet, he got a damn flamenco fade. Just some bitch gotta let it line up. The Moscow mullet. There's some other heads out there. You got the La Ventas, right? You got the dang La Venta heads over there. You got the San Lorenzis over there. I don't know much about anything, but there was some old big lip bastards over there on the Veracruz coast, and they was most likely Siberians. Let's keep it 100, boy. What them boys say? Let's keep it 100. That's all I'm talking about. Let's keep it 100. Now, they ain't got the nice face on now. That's them rubber band mans, boy. They say they ball players, boy. You know what I'm saying? They're the Siberian, they're the Huskies. It's the team name. They're the Huskies, man. Ping pong player. Since they say that the Olmecs there, they kind of like the mother civilization. They just say everything kind of broke off from them, right? Now, the Yucatan is an interesting place, right? I don't know if y'all ever heard the little thing in school where they said that big asteroid hit the Yucatan, right? And when that sumbitch hit the Yucatan, the whole dang dinosaurs just died out, just flopped, just gone. Hey, it was it right there. This the spot right here. By God, Yucatan. All right. Flamed all them dinosaurs up. Stinked in a mug out this mug, boy. Can you believe that? We're not here to talk about your belief in dinosaurs. We're not talking about that, all right? We're not. I can't talk about that right now. But the Yucatan, like I was saying, that big old asteroid hit the dang edge up there in Merida, up there about where they make that bread at, you feel me? Up there in the dang North Yucatan, out there, you know what I'm talking about, out there at the neck, you know what I'm talking about, out there at the neck. Now once that thing hit, it switched up. Now it changed the whole land, boy. The whole land, you know, that's how come they got all them reserves out there. They say that the Yucatan is probably one of the most biodiverse places there is. Got a whole bunch of new wildlife out there. That's after, you know, all the old wildlife died right there, right? It's the spot of the dinosaur apocalypse. The dinosaurs died I wonder if Yucatan means dead dinosaurs, dinosaur apocalypse, or the end of the dinosaurs. Well, anyway, they say that Yucatan is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, all right? They got all kinds of turtles and birds and all kinds of whatnot. The majority of the land out there is limestone. It's that old soft stuff. Got sinkholes and everything. They ain't really got many rivers, okay, but they got them underground rivers, okay, because what them sinkholes do is create a bunch of underground cave systems, all right, a bunch of sinkholes and caverns out there in the Yucatan, boy. And this is where the Mayans was. Now, they was out there with them caverns and sinkholes. They was wilding, you feel me? So you got plenty of sites over there, man. You can see the vicinity between them and the Olmecs, and of course, you can also see the vicinity between them and the Aztecs, although they say they ain't had much contact with one another. You can believe that if you want to, you feel me? You know what I'm talking about? So out there in the Yucatan, right adjacent to that little elbow out there, you out there at the neck, right? You got several Mayan sites, man. Come on now. You got Palenque, you got Piedras Negras, you got Pomona, you got Etna, you know what I'm talking about? You got Uxmal, you got Mayapan, man. You got dang Chichen Itza, boy. You got Tulum, boy. You got Tulum out there, boy. Quirigara, you got Copan out there, boy. Now, this is where the majority of the Mayans was kicking it now. They was out there in the damn Yucatan kicking it, all right? I think one of the more interesting things about this whole Maya thing, as you can take a look at their geography, is that they had access to two oceans, all right? They had access to the Atlantic. There's out there in the Gulf, right? And then the western part of their empire had access to the Pacific. Now, at a time when everybody, especially the Europeans, was in the age of discovery and renaming things and claiming things, what thing was they trying to do? They was always looking for old Northwest Passage, trying to find a quick way to India, apparently they were looking for India, right? Well, whether you believe that or not, we all know that they was always looking for a shortcut. They was trying to cut through somewhere to try to get to the other side of the world. You talk about influence, being able to travel the world within your own borders without having to circumvent an entire continent, let's say. Wasn't no Panama Canal, boy, at this time. The Panama Canal was Maya territory. I'm just saying all that to say this. By God, that's my geography right there. Learn something, boy. Learn something, boy.
So, this first contact with Maya urban spaces came in the 19th century. This is very, very late in order to discover a lost civilization. It had really been buried away in the jungle with very, very little news reaching the outside world until the first few decades of the 19th century. Then you have explorers who are penetrating into the forest. They're following up on rumors of places that they should visit. And in this case, before photography, they're doing lithographs and drawings and taking molds and generally coming back to the Western world and announcing these amazing things left in the forest. And we go up now to the end of the 19th century because this is Tikal as well, excavated as certainly as trees cut down by Alfred Maudsley. And this is a period when really we don't know very much about Maya society or civilization at all. This is still the very, very beginnings of our understanding.
Quote, Maya, The Riddle and Rediscovery of a Lost Civilization by Charles Gallenkamp. Shout out to Harry Hubbard. He actually gave me this book a while back. John Lloyd Stevens is considered the father of Maya archaeology. So we're going to jump ahead to page 45 in this book. Quote, as early as 1840, John Lloyd Stevens stated in his book, Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas, and Yucatan, that the ruins he had explored were those of an indigenous civilization, which developed apart from any outside influences. He categorically ruled out the principal sources of foreign inspiration from which Maya culture might have sprung. I sat out with the proposition that they were not cyclopean, he wrote, and do not resemble the works of Greek or Roman. There was nothing in Europe like them. So far as Asia was concerned, Stevens found little evidence for serious comparisons. He saw no similarity between Maya buildings and those of ancient China or Japan. And he emphasized the complete absence in Mexico and Central America of the artificially excavated caves and rock chambers typical of Buddhist and Hindu temples. Stevens then challenged the premises on which Maya and Egyptian architecture were so often equated, particularly the occurrence of pyramids in both regions. The pyramidal form, he observed, is one which suggests itself to human intelligence in every country as the simplest and surest mode of erecting a high structure upon a solid foundation. It cannot be regarded as a ground for assigning a common origin to all people among whose structures of that character are found, unless the similarity is preserved in its most striking features. Egyptian pyramids, he pointed out, were characteristically uniform in design and intended solely as burial places. By contrast, those in America varied greatly in form and were constructed primarily to support temples or shrines on their summits. With regard to other types of structures, Stevens noted that massive columns, a distinguishing feature of Egyptian architecture, were absent in Mayan ruins, nor do they exhibit the dromos, avenue of approach, the pronaos, porch or vestibule, or the adytum, inner sanctum, usually found in Egyptian temples. He cited marked differences in comparative methods of construction and decorative embellishment, and the relatively small stones used by the Maya were, in Stevens' words, scarcely worthy of being laid in the walls of an Egyptian temple. He's basically saying that Maya temples were built out of shit, and those huge granite slabs that are used in temples in Egypt are superior in quality. Furthermore, he conceded only the most superficial resemblances between the sculpture of the two areas. If there be any at all, he declared, it is only that the figures are in profile, and this is equally true of all good sculpture in bas relief. Exploding as they did in the midst of overwhelming opinion to the contrary, Stevens' speculations were as daring as they were prophetic. In refuting the assumption that Maya civilizations stemmed from Indo-European sources of inspiration, he had advanced a revolutionary hypothesis now greatly accepted by archaeologists. The works of these people, he insisted, are different from the works of any other known people. They are of a new order, and entirely and absolutely anomalous. They stand alone. End quote. When the Maya ruins were first discovered, they do not look like they do right now. Most of them resembled a mound or a hill of dirt that had been massively overgrown by the forest. All of these monuments have been restored. That means that historians and archaeologists and some architects have used their creative license to rebuild these monuments. So what you're seeing is a result of what they think these monuments look like. And that goes for much of the stele as well. When you're seeing these depictions, many of them have been restored by artists. So even the stele that may look really ornate or intricate, many of these stele have been repurposed and restored. Remember Brigitto Lara, the man who forged over 40,000 Mesoamerican artifacts. Many of these artifacts were whitewashed. He basically remade the face of Veracruz through his art. So when you're seeing some of these depictions, understand what's going on here. Brigitto Lara was faking artifacts, and the archaeologists were dating it in the correct period. They were dated between 200 and 600 AD perfectly. But he just faked it in 1973. What are we talking about? Use your brain, Maine. Be careful of the more than perfect depictions. So, of course, these people have been accused of whitewashing the early stelae. They've been accused of whitewashing the early lithographs and photographs, and or doing the same thing Napoleon was accused of, like breaking the mouths and the lips and the noses off Mayan artifacts. That's why so many of them don't have lips and noses. Everything else is perfect, but the lip and the nose, it's gone. Now, let's restore it. This is what it would have looked like. You think these guys are going to record these ancient civilizations purely out of intellectual curiosity. But they are funded by whom? Brigitto Lara was such a good forger, he forged his way out of prison. Hey, man, you've got all these stolen antiquities. Nah, man, those are fake. Watch this. Do-do-do-do-do-do. Here you go. Holy shit. As many Mayan archaeologists believe, there are thousands more of these monuments and pyramids lost in the Yucatan forest yet to be discovered. When these monuments were discovered, they were overgrown by the forest. So what you're seeing now is a result of restoration. When these monuments were first discovered, many of them resembled the mounds of the Mississippians. So just in case you're wondering what's under those mounds in North America, chances are it's something that resembles one of these pyramid complexes. Quote, page 47, quote, "It perhaps destroys much of the interest that hangs over these ruins to assign them to a modern day. But if we live in an age whose spirit is to disregard fanaticisms and arrive at truth, and in the interest lost in one particular is supplied in another scarcely inferior. For the nearer we can bring the builders of these cities to our own times, the greater is our chance of knowing all. Throughout the country, the converts are rich in manuscripts and documents written by the early fathers, the caciques and Indians, who very soon acquired the knowledge of Spanish and the art of writing. These have never been examined with the slightest reference to this subject, and I cannot help thinking that some precious memorial is now moldering in the library of a neighboring convent, which would determine the history of some of these ruined cities. Moreover, I cannot help believing that the tablets of hieroglyphs will yet be read. No strong curiosity has hitherto been directed to them. For centuries, the hieroglyphics of Egypt were inscrutable, and though not perhaps in our day, I feel persuaded that a key surer than that of the Rosetta Stone will be discovered. Remember, the Rosetta Stone is the only reason they know Egyptian. It was the perfect finding, almost too perfect. For any archaeologist or for anyone who studies ancient languages, the Rosetta Stone was the perfect find. You couldn't have asked for a more perfect find. And if only 3 centuries have elapsed since any of these unknown cities was inhabited, the race of the inhabitants is not extinct. Their descendants are still in the land, scattered, perhaps and retired, like our own Indians, into the wildernesses, which have never been penetrated by a white man." End quote. That quote is from John Lloyd Stevens, the father of Maya archaeology. He says possibly the descendants of the Maya still live in the wilderness, which has not been penetrated by the white man. Let's take a look at some of these descendants who still live in the Mayan wilderness. look at the Central American, or you look at what they call the indigenous South American, or even the indigenous Mexican, or even the people who they call Maya right now. And of course, if you're talking about a Native American, you'll notice that there is a myriad of these Asian genetic characteristics. The thing that always gets overlooked when these geneticists try to make these postulations about these certain Asian populations, and I'm not just talking about the Siberian population. All of these people can claim an ancestry by way of Siberia, but specifically when we're talking about these so-called indigenous populations in the Americas who have these Asian phenotypes, most of these phenotypes that you're seeing, especially in Central and South America, is a South Asian phenotype. So we always hear about the Spanish colonizing the Americas. We hear about them colonizing Mexico in the early 1500s and 1492. Well, in 1565, they were already running the galleons in the Philippines. Not only did they control both sides of Maya territory, they controlled the Atlantic and they controlled the Pacific, or their families controlled the Atlantic and the Pacific, in terms of being able to trade and ship freely. Charlatan's Web quote, Asian Mexicans, to jump down just below the colonial era. However, regular immigration did not begin until 1565 with the establishment of the Manila-Acapulco galleon, which economically linked Asia, the Americas, and Europe. During those 2.5 centuries, many Filipinos, Mexicans, and others sailed from Mexico and the Philippines. Mexicans as soldiers, governors, and sailors, and Filipinos as slaves, prisoners, and crew. Okay, so we're talking about really an intercontinental exchange of people. And of course, there's going to be some mingling going on, right? On these voyages, thousands of Asian individuals, mostly males, were brought to Mexico as slaves and were called chinos, or Indios chinos, which meant Chinese and Indian respectively. Although in reality, they were of diverse origins, mostly Filipino, but also including slaves brought from the Portuguese or captured through war, like Moros, Muslim Filipinos, Malays, Javanese, Bengalis, and other ethnic groups in smaller numbers, such as Japanese, Chinese, Sinhalese, Cambodians, Koreans, and Timorese. So continuing, during the early period of Spanish colonization of the Philippines, Spaniards took advantage of the indigenous alipin, the bonded serf system in the Philippines, to circumvent the leyes de las Indias, the laws of the Indies, and acquire Filipino slaves for the voyage back to New Spain. Though the numbers are unknown, of course they're unknown, and you should hear some of these estimates. Though the numbers are unknown, it was so prevalent that slaves brought on ships were restricted to 1 per person, except for persons of rank, in the laws regarding navigation and commerce, to avoid exhausting ship provisions. They were also taxed heavily upon arrival in Acapulco in an effort to reduce slave traffic. Trafficking Filipino women as slaves, servants, and mistresses of government officials, crew, and passengers also caused scandals in the 17th century. Women comprised of about 20% of the migrants from the Philippines. What this is really saying that they were bringing Filipino women here since the late 1500s, and a primary purpose of these Filipino women were to act as mistresses for government officials. And what happens when a woman is a mistress for anyone? They usually end up having children out of wedlock. These Filipinos, some were slaves, some were indentured servants, some were mercenaries. They played an important role in the class system. And of course, at this time in colonialism, the class system is based off colorism. And so what you're really seeing with these people is a combination of genetics. And the European or even Spanish genetic marker is a misnomer because there was a portion of their genetic ancestry that was North African. Filipinos were also pressed into service as sailors. Due to the native maritime culture of the Philippine Islands, by 1619, The crew of Manila galleons were composed mostly of native sailors. So Filipinos were actually sailing ships for the Spanish, under the Spanish flag, many of whom died during voyages due to harsh treatment and dangerous conditions. Many of the galleons were also old, overloaded, and poorly repaired. A law passed in 1608 restricted the gear of Filipino sailors to rope and aceria, which consisted of a single pair of breeches, further causing great numbers of deaths. Hold on, what is fucking breeches? You mean breeches? Which consisted of a single pair of breeches, further causing a great number of deaths of Filipino sailors through exposure. These conditions prompted King Philip III to sign a law in 1620 forcing merchants to use proper clothing to native crews. During this period, many Filipino sailors deserted as soon as they reached Acapulco. Sebastian de Pineda, the captain of the galleon Espiritu Santo, complained to the king in 1619 that of the 75 Filipino crewmen aboard the ship, only 5 remained for the return voyage. The rest had deserted. These sailors settled in Mexico and married locals, even though some may have previously been married in the Philippines, particularly since they were also in high demand by wine merchants in Colima for their skills in the production of tuba or palm wine.
I'm just in
The estimate of the number of Asian immigrants during the colonial era ranged from 40,000 to 120,000. It's actually a lot more than that. Way more than that. Way more than that. And you'll notice that this is where the citation ends. By comparison, during the colonial era, Mexico received about 500,000 Europeans and 250,000 Africans. Oh, really? Only 250,000 Africans throughout the entire colonial era. These early Asian individuals, the foundation of the Cuarta Raíz, I guess that's how you say that shit, are not very apparent in modern Mexico for a few reasons: relatively small numbers, racial mixing of colonial Mexico, and the common practice of Chino slaves to pass as Indios in order to attain freedom, as had occurred with a large portion of Mexico's black population. Over generations, the Asian populace was absorbed into the general mestizo population. The indigenous people were legally protected from chattel slavery. By being recognized as part of this group, Asian slaves would claim they were wrongly enslaved. See what's going on here? A notable case of free Asians working in an urban setting is the 1635 conflict between Chino and Spanish barbers in Mexico City. The legal case resulted in the expulsion of the Asians from the city center, limit on their numbers to 12, and prohibition on adopting Asian apprentices. Nonetheless, a 1667 document from Real Audiencia details the attempt to limit the more than 100 barbershops run by Asians without a license to 12. 100 Asian barbershops, okay? So the barbering trade, we're talking about from 1667. Now, do you think these people here, this 100 Asian barbers in 1667, 100 Chino barbers, now they're called Chinos Indios. But are these people actually Indios? Are they actually indigenous to the land? If you were to look at the population of people today that they would call indigenous to these areas, who are they really descended from? Are they truly indigenous? Are they descended from the Filipinos, who some intermixed with Indians for generations? Continuing, some Chinos, especially Filipinos who were Spanish subjects, held certain rights not afforded to most indigenous people, Indios, such as carrying a sword, dagger, or riding on a horse.
Who this nigga up on that name?
So not only did these Chinos, aka Indios, Chinos, or Chinos Indios, the Chinese slaves who are actually from the Philippines, not only did they come in waves that really hasn't been documented, even though we we see here that they try to put a blind estimate on those numbers. 80% of the Filipinos, as soon as they landed in Acapulco, deserted and never went back to the Philippines. Think about that. They were basically like, we're not getting back on that ship with the Spanish. So they deserted as soon as they landed in Acapulco and started intermingling with native women. And subsequently, in later years, because they were really vassals of the Spanish Empire and they were at war with the Indians, so they were still acting as mercenaries. They were still conducting trade on behalf of the Spanish hierarchy. These people were given rights not afforded to the Indians. And of course, we see here in the text that they try to intermingle the Indian and the Africans that were already there, but they weren't there. There were no Africans there. And we can see here that the number of Africans that actually got traded into Mexico is very small in comparison by their own numbers. So even these so-called Africans that came to Mexico were most likely from the islands. They were most likely captives from mainland America or possibly mainland South America and shipped to the islands and then shipped to Mexico, as opposed to it being an actual African. Especially during these early days, who were the slaves? They weren't bringing Africans here. The slaves were the Indians who were captured in war. And the Filipinos came over here as vassals for the Spaniards, as a buffer class. So this again is just to explain that there is a significant history of contact and migration between the Philippines and Mexico. That's why these so-called indigenous populations have South Asian phenotypes. What was the race of the Mayan? We all know that the ideas about race that we've been taught are a complete lie. Skin color is not a determining factor for the distinguishment of race, or more appropriately called genetic ancestry. The biggest fallacy in their template is the theory of evolution and the out of Africa theory, which asserts that humans evolved through millions of years of monkey sex that eventually led to the modern human. Of course, all this happened in Africa. Then these monkey people left out of Africa, traveled to the Caucasus Caves, had one huge orgy that created a ton of races. These new races spread across the world, in which the Siberian group left the caves, traveled through the Bering Strait to discover an entirely empty America. Since this theory is taken as a scientific truth, surely there's some evidence to back up this claim. So let's take a look at the oldest fully intact skeletons found in Maya territory to see how this theory holds up. So we're going to talk about the race, and we're going to look at this through the eyes of the charlatans, through their accepted methods of determining such things. It's interesting, the type of terminology they use. So the first thing that I want to do is we're just going to go to Charlatan's Web. I'm sure there's no evidence that people possibly dispersed from the Americas. There's no history here. There's nothing here. There was nothing here till they got here. Notice anytime they describe the physical characteristics of an indigenous American, they always compare them to a Pacific Islander or a Melanesian. They actually are completely different people than the quote unquote African, although genetically they can just bring these people up to try to draw some physical connection. What do they look like? Melanesians. What do they look like? Australians. Do they? Are they? Well, they've got a Siberian ancestor and they look black, the same as Australians and Melanesians, so that must be where they're from. So now let's talk about Naya. So Naya was found off the coast of the Yucatan. And of course, the Yucatan being right there in Maya territory. So we have Naya, who was found near the Maya, except for the Maya didn't exist. Weren't even a thing at the time. And Naya, I'm sure, has no connection with the Maya. Naya is the name given to a 12 or 13,000 year old human skeleton of a teenage female who was found in the Yucatan Peninsula. At the time of Naya's death, the cave was mostly dry. She likely died falling into Hoyo Negro. The remains have been described as the oldest and most complete genetically intact human skeleton in the New World. So Naya, found off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, apparently is a 13,000-year-old human skeleton found right in Maya territory. The remains have been described as the oldest, most complete, and genetically intact human skeleton in the New World. In the New World. Wow. Very old skeleton for the New World. So let's read some of their fuckery. We're just gonna jump down here. We're still on Charlatan's Web. Evidence from full genomic studies suggests that the first people in the Americans, both Paleo-Americans and later contemporary Native Americans, diverged from ancient Near East Asians about 36,000 years ago and expanded northwards into Siberia, where they encountered and interacted with a different Paleolithic Siberian population known as the ancient North Eurasians, giving rise to both Paleo-Siberian peoples and ancient Native Americans, which later migrated toward the Beringian region, became isolated from other populations, and subsequently populated the Americas. So what we have here is we have all the charlatans saying that the source population for the Americas was out of Siberia. How true is this? And notice every time they want to describe the physical characteristics of an ancient American, they always have to use Austro-Melanesian. They have to use South Pacific Islander. They have to use an Australian. The reason they do that is because no one was ever here. And you can resemble anything but an African. And for some reason, the only bodies they've ever found are Siberians, apparently. They have to use craniomorphology. And then what happens? It's like, oh, I don't know, man. This person kind of looks like they're black. All right. Let's test her again. We need a Siberian ancestor. She just needs to have 0.01% Siberian. Just a little. She just needs one Siberian ancestor. And for those who know me, and of course I do biblical studies, and if I'm saying that America is the ancient Holy Land, of course, America has been a melting pot of ethnicity since people. That's my argument. When I'm saying America is Egypt and I say America is the ancient Holy Land, that includes all the populations of the ancient Holy Land and all of their different ethnicities. America's Egypt is really America's Mitzrayim. America used to be Canaan. America's Philistia. America is Ashur. America is Assyria. America is Babylon. America is Israel. So it encompasses a lot more layers than just a single homogeneous race separated from everybody in the world, as opposed to the way people look at the other side of the world. And it was almost like Africa is the Garden of Eden for different species. Just in case you get lost in the sauce, America is the ancient Holy Land. When I say America is Egypt, I'm also saying America is Israel. America is Jerusalem, hidden in the thicket of the forest out west, in an area larger than Israel that no one can step foot in. You know, all of that Bureau of Land Management land that's out there, The majority of this land is unpopulated, uninhabited still. We live in cities. So when I'm saying America is the ancient Holy Land, understanding that there were different ethnicities even before the Canaanites went down and were taken over by the Israelites, and then the Israelites were taken down by the Greek, these histories can be shown throughout the ancient history of the Americas. That's my point, that there has never been just one single ethnicity on the continent. They impose these false doctrines to make their mechanisms work. These genetic charades of fuckery only prove that people had sex with people who may be of different bloodlines. If America is Egypt, obviously. So there's layers of fuckery going on here. And part of that layer of fuckery is saying that the indigenous American derived by their methods through the Bering Strait from Siberia. It's not just about the image of a population. It's about the history and identity of peoples. People are most identified from the land in which they descend and have descended from generations. Their argument is America is East Siberia, possibly West Siberia. So the study that they're referencing, late Pleistocene human skeleton and mitochondrial link, Paleo-Americans and modern Native Americans. Oh, you see what they're doing here? A late Pleistocene human skeleton and mitochondrial DNA link Paleo-Americans with modern Native Americans. They're saying that this study in some way proves their theory. Quote, because the differences in craniofacial morphology and detonations between the earliest American skeletons and modern Native Americans, separate origins have been postulated for them, despite genetic evidence to the contrary. We describe a near complete human skeleton with an intact cranium and preserved DNA found with extinct fauna. Oh, they found it with fauna. So she might as well be as old as the fauna. This skeleton dates to between 13,000 and 12,000 calendar years ago and has Paleo-American craniofacial characteristics and a Beringian-derived mitochondrial DNA haplogroup D1. Thus, the differences between Paleo-Americans and Native Americans probably resulted from in situ evolution rather than separate ancestry. It was just like phases of evolution. What happened is, after Siberians have sex for so long, they fuck themselves into some niggas. If a Chinese nigga has sex with Chinese niggas, at some point those Chinese niggas turn black. And black people don't have to fuck nothing but black people. They'll end up looking Chinese. You know, that 0.01% or that 2% that you got, that's the majority of your DNA. Obviously, Siberians fuck themselves into niggas. Chihuahua fuck themselves. If a Chihuahua fucks another Chihuahua, at some point they'll be a wolf again. Quote, genetic studies of contemporary Native Americans and late prehistoric skeletal remains from the Americas have consistently supported the idea that Native Americans are descended from Siberian ancestors who moved into eastern Beringia between 26,000 and 18,000 years ago. They're so sure about this shit. Spreading southward into the Americas after 17,000 years before present, a complete genome analysis of the 12 to 6,000 years before present Anzac infant from Montana. Oh, they found a baby in Montana. And mitochondrial DNA from 14,000 years before present coprolites from Paisley Caves in Oregon, and mitochondrial DNA from earlier remains from Nevada and Alaska support this hypothesis. Oh man, they found a baby in Montana, in Alaska, and you know, they had some Siberian DNA in them, so you know, that's where they're from. With Anzac linked to the Clovis culture and Paisley Caves to the west, STEM tradition, North America's two widespread early archaeological complexes, the genetic evidence for a Beringian origin of the earliest inhabitants of Western North America is compelling. Oh, it's compelling. They're Siberians. Well, they've got a Siberian marker. It appears as though they have a Siberian ancestor. This points to their Siberian origin. Were there any other ancestors? This was the study referenced, okay? This was the study referenced in Wikipedia. The ancestry of the earliest Americans is still debated. Thought you guys knew everything. However, because the oldest skeletal remains from the Americas consistently failed to group morphometrically with modern Native Americans, Siberians, and other Northeast Asians, Paleo-Americans exhibit longer, narrower crania and smaller and shorter, more projecting faces than later Native Americans in nearly all cases. Let's read this. In nearly all cases, they are morphologically most similar to modern peoples of Africa. But still, right after this, the study hits you with the Austro-Melanesian caveat. But when the study was cited on Wikipedia, the word African was alleviated. In nearly all cases, they are morphologically most similar to modern peoples of Africa. And then it goes on to give you the Austro-Melanesian caveat. This is in reference to Naya, found in the Yucatan Peninsula. Now we come to the part of the episode most people have been waiting for. How does any of this relate to ancient Egypt? First and foremost, we're just going to skip over the part about pyramids for now. Because not only is it low-hanging fruit, it's also possibly the most superficial point in connecting ancient America to ancient Egypt. There are indeed pyramids in Europe and Asia, so just having pyramids itself doesn't create a strong enough point to hang an argument on. The most credible way to make these associations is cultural practice. What are the traditions among the Maya that parallel what we've been told about ancient Egypt? One point made in an earlier episode that can just as rightly be applied to the Maya as well as the Egyptians, as well as the Mexica, the Toltec, the Udo, Aztec, and Nahuatl-speaking tribes of the Southwest, as well as the Mississippians, is the role of dogs in funerary traditions. Anubis, the dog-headed god from the Egyptian pantheon, according to Egyptian tradition, is the guide of the underworld and accompanies the soul after death. This tradition may never be more true than with the Maya, who sacrificed dogs as a common tradition of their burial rites. Charlatan's Web quote, Maya burials from the classic period are frequently found with associated animal remains, often dogs. For example, in the ruins of the classic Maya city of Chronology, I guess that's how you say that shit, in Guatemala, a dog was found interred with a sitting skeleton, along with grave goods offered to the deceased. The frequent finds of dog skeletons in classic Maya burials confirms that the belief that dogs guided the souls of the departed on their journey into the underworld already existed at the time. Interesting, and not Egyptian at all. The dog is sometimes depicted carrying a torch in these surviving Maya codices, which may be a reference to the Maya tradition that the dog brought fire to mankind. In the post-classic Popol Vuh of the Quiche Maya of highland Guatemala, dogs and turkeys killed people of the Second Age in retaliation for the people beating them. The people who escaped this fate were transformed into monkeys. Sounds familiar? Jasher 9. Another account of Popol Vuh describes the hero twins. I want to stop here because now I'm reminded that some archaeologists think that some of these finds and some of these artifacts that were found in North America, in Mississippian territory, in Indian territory, they actually represent the hero twins. The same story being told through the Maya culture, but we all know there was no contact, right? Another account of Popol Vuh describes the hero twins sacrificing a dog that belonged to the lords of the underworld known as Xibalba. After the dog was dead, the hero twins brought it back to life. The lords were so impressed that they asked the twins to sacrifice and resurrect them. In the end, the hero twins sacrificed the lords of Zabalba and did not follow through on bringing them back to life. The story linked dogs with renewal in human life. Dogs are associated with death and may have the job of leading people into the underworld. They represent fire and are protectors of the earth, two components of Maya life. The belief already existed in Maya culture that dogs guided souls of the recently deceased into the underworld. Who does that sound like? Did more people practice this ritual in Egypt? Or do you think more people practice this ritual in America? Because we already know that the population of the ancient world, the lie of there being no one here is already falling apart. And since the Egyptians were here much longer than the Maya, apparently, right? And there was no contact, no cross-Atlantic, no cross-continental contact ever. How did that practice come to be among the Maya? Here is a Mayan picture depicting, well, other than Siberians, this is a Mayan picture depicting a funeral procession. Do you notice anything peculiar about this picture and non-Egyptian at all? If you notice here, under the deceased person, there is some sort of animal. But right up under there is a dog. That doesn't look like anything from anywhere else. And it definitely wasn't first. Okay, this was more primitive yet later in time. Because, you know, these people they're primitive. You see their shitty monuments? They're terrible, right? They're nothing like the Egyptians. This dog here, that's actually not a dog. That's some sort of it's a aardvark. I don't know, but it's not a dog. And if it is a dog, it don't got nothing to do with Egypt, my nigga. I just want you to be clear on that. All right? It's a dead man and a dog in a procession, along with the legends of dogs guiding the souls to the underworld. Don't mean nothing, boy. Another parallel also mentioned in earlier episodes, but definitely should not be overlooked, is the presence of corn in Egyptian art. In the book Ancient Egyptian Maize, author Gunnar Thompson highlights hundreds of examples of corn in Egyptian art, but also Babylonian, Chinese, and Hindu, which we already emphasized in the America is India, episode 9. If there was never any contact between the Maya and Egypt, how do you suppose corn made it to Egypt, much less China, Babylon, and India? Their academically approved no-contact theories are the historical stonewall between his story and his truth. And his story has been secretly manufactured by the hidden hand. Another parallel also mentioned is language. Augustus Le Plongeon, a man who spent over 12 years in the Yucatan, was one of the first people to use modern photography at Chichen Itza, one of the first people also to decipher Mayan hieroglyphics, and spoke the Yucatec Mayan language, asserted that 1/3 of the Mayan tongue is pure Greek. And of course, Greek was the language of Egypt after the days of Alexander, beginning around 300 BC. According to Gunnar Thompson, the author of Ancient Egyptian Maize, the ancient Egyptians' name for corn was maza. The pyramids of Egypt were thought to be tombs for the pharaohs, but no pharaoh was exhumed or found in any of the great pyramids of Egypt. Most of, if not all, royal Egyptian burials are situated in the Valley of the Kings, nearly 400 miles to the south of Giza. In contrast, Mayan pyramids were the location for generations of royal burials. Something thought to be an exclusively Egyptian practice is not even practiced in Egypt, but is practiced by the Mayans in a way ancient Egypt could never compare. It's also worth mentioning that just like Egyptian pharaohs, Maya royalty was buried in sarcophagi, the only difference being Maya royalty was buried in sarcophagi under pyramids. Something thought to be an exclusively Egyptian practice is not even practiced in Egypt, but is practiced by the Mayans in a way ancient Egypt could never compare. You may never find a pyramid in Egypt with a royal burial, but in Mexico, you may never find a royal burial without a pyramid. What else is hiding under these pyramids? A barbaric ingredient of Maya culture that cannot be overlooked. Also hiding under these structures are the bodies of sacrificed children. According to the archaeologists, it is said that the Maya practiced child sacrifice as a common occurrence in numerous rituals. Child sacrifice was also practiced on several occasions in the Old Testament by several ancient nations, including the Canaanites and the Israelites, especially in the earlier days. After the Assyrian deportation, it was later more closely linked with the Assyrians and Babylonians. According to 2 Kings chapter 17, the men of Babylon and other nations, including the Sepharvaim, made for themselves gods and made the lowest of the men high priest. And they served their gods and sacrificed their children in the high places. This practice of child sacrifice is more recently linked to Babylon following the Assyrian deportation rather than Egypt in any way at all. What happened to the Maya? Some people claim that the Maya never left and are the people still living in the old Maya-occupied territories. However, the most common theory is that they were wiped out by the Spanish, mostly due to disease. But is there any chance that some of the Maya could have relocated? There have been reports that stated that some of the Maya did relocate to Guatemala after the fall of the Mayan Empire. But is there a chance that the Maya could have relocated to the north end of the Gulf Coast, specifically around Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, or Florida? Because apparently there are some very strong cultural connections and even strong archaeological connections, especially at the Crystal River site in Florida, where Mayan hieroglyphics were found and a cache of other Mayan artifacts buried in a temple mound complex. This mound complex just happened to be constructed with a similar layout, design, and astronomical alignment to Venus as the Mayan complexes in the Yucatan. But this isn't where the connections end. Many of the places and names associated with Florida, Georgia, and to a lesser extent the Southeast are Itza Mayan in origin, especially cities, mountains, and rivers. The Itza Maya language was one of the last variations spoken during the fall of the Mayan Empire in the late 1600s. Itza Mayan words of places and names that may sound familiar are names like Tallahassee, Muskogee, Hatice, Okeechobee, Appalachie, Etowah, Catawba, Chickamauga, Tallulah, Any word with hoochie or hatchie is of Itza Mayan origin, meaning creek or shallow river. Rivers like the Tallahatchie, the Chattahoochee. Any river with a hatchie or a hoochie, or even a coochie for that matter, is of Itza Mayan origin. Most of these terms were first mislabeled Muskogee Creek, but now after linguists slowly pieced together the nearly extinct Itza Mayan language, the overwhelming consensus points to a Mesoamerican linguistic origin for the Muskogee Creek language family. Could this mean that some of the Maya left the Yucatan and relocated to the southeast United States after the fall of the Maya Empire? Or does it mean that the Maya originally inhabited the southeast United States and expanded or migrated into the Yucatan? There is a case for both. Remember in the Hidden Hand episode, we showed the connection between the Maya and the tribes as far north as the Pudd'nhead district in Indiana, while credibly showing the connection between the Maya and artifacts found in Georgia? This was all without using the benefit of language. But once you add the Hatchie Hoochie Coochie connection, it's an open and shut case, Johnson. Obviously, these niggers broke into this country and started putting statues and figurines of themselves everywhere. Let's sprinkle some crack on them and get out of here. And if the Hatchie Hoochie Coochie Usa Kusa connection isn't strong enough, the Indians of Florida were called Maya before they were called anything else, like Seminole, for example. Some of the first Florida Indians on record to come into contact with Europeans were called the Mayaca, who occupied the area around Lake Okeechobee, another Mayan word, which was previously called Lake Mayaco. But probably the most significant and overlooked connection, sitting right under our nose, is the most popular city in the state of Florida, Miami. Miami, whose etymological prefix is Maya, was named after the Miami Indians of Florida. The Miami Indians were named after who? Hey man, you be. Now you know some of them Mayans look Chinese, nigga. How you explain that? Listen, my nigga, it's never been my position that there were never any other types of ethnicities in America. On the contrary, if I say America is Egypt or the Holy Land, that implies several dozen ancient bloodlines. So the appearance of Mongoloid Mayans or even Mayans that might look a little Caucasian doesn't contradict that template. In fact, it only strengthens that template and demonstrates an ancient intermingling of bloodlines. But also, don't be fooled by appearance. There are plenty of dark-skinned races that appear as Negroes in Asia, specifically South Asia and the South Pacific. And there are even races of Africans that appear Mongoloid. So when you say something like, this statue looks like an Asian, well, there's some puddin'-faced niggas in Indiana who might have something to say about that. My point is that the Negro has always been in America, and his bloodlines are not only indigenous, but represent the genetic baseline for all of the ancient races in America, including the greatest portion of Mississippians and Mayans. Because if this wasn't the case, why did the Mayans have sickle cell anemia? A genetic disease mostly associated with Africans or African Americans. Several genetic studies conducted on ancient Maya confirm this. Some geneticists take this information to mean that the Mayans were of African origin, but they weren't. They were of American origin, and they have been purposely mislabeled as African. That's the only way his story works.